Welcome to the Carbon Exposure Project, a platform for peer-to-peer conversations with the people that are helping to shape the carbon market of tomorrow. Join me, Rene Velasquez, as I get to have conversations on topics ranging from ESG and finance over cocktails in the Lion City of Singapore. Cheers. My guest today is Duncan Van Bergen from Caylx Global, a ratings agency developing solutions to rate and quantify the quality of projects. His mission is to re-establish trust in the markets and to help to change the paradigm and drive the market towards higher quality. It's a pleasure to sit down with Duncan today. They're not here. It was just
yeah, totally. I love the setting.
Yeah, it's good. Ready to roll, guys?
Yep.
Cool. Duncan, welcome to the Carbon Exposure Project, man. It's a pleasure to see you.
Thanks for having me. This is so great.
It's always a pleasure to see you. Actually, when I moved back, a little anecdote here, if you'll indulge me.
Mm-hmm.
When I first moved back to Singapore mid last year, I think you were one of the first people that I saw. I moved back and you're like, hey man, let's catch up for coffee.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you. Yeah, that's right. And so thanks for showing me hospitality then. And now it's my turn to reciprocate.
Excellent.
So
I love your setting. It's
a pretty good setup.
It's a bit more sophisticated than when I took you. I love it.
Oh yeah, well, hey, you have friends in high places, right? So you got to call them up. No, the crew from.
You are my friend in high places.
No, I've had a few drinks at a few bars, and so my hack is talk to the barman, and then you become friends. So anyway, I called in some favors, and the folks here at 28 Hong Kong Street graciously allowed us to come and film today and other times for these episodes. So
I'm coming back tonight.
Yeah, you should definitely. Oh no, you just broke the third wall. It's not nighttime. No, that's good, mate. Hey, thanks for joining me. Really sincerely, it's a pleasure to see you.
Same here.
I wanted to obviously pick your brains and learn from you. I think we had this chat off camera. The impetus for this platform, and it's a platform, is for dialogue. It's basically my love letter to the carbon markets. I've been in this space. I've been very fortunate for many, many years to work in this space with awesome people. And it's essentially to provide a platform for discourse, for dialogue, and for learning. I want it to be inclusive. I want to essentially, people talk about transparency, and I feel that we can do that by talking about things that are complicated and learning from people who are practitioners of the art form. Mm-hmm. And I consider you to be one of those expert practitioners, master level. So that's my intro to you. Hopefully not too egregious, but thank you for coming. And I really want to start, if I can, focusing on the amazing work that you and your team at Caylx are doing. And effectively, again, focusing on this narrative around transparency, your team is actually doing the work. It's not just talking the talk, but doing the work to highlight quality, which is this very historically subjective topic, and you're making it objective through quantification and data-driven analysis, which is really needed in this market. So thank you for that. Can I just unpack that with you? Tell me a little bit about that journey so far.
Sure.
How many years old is now Caylx? And give me a little bit of background around the company. And then I've got some other questions around the subject matter expertise.
Thanks. Well, first, thanks again, Rene. Love the setting and love the invite.
Thanks, man.
Beyond mastery, if I'm even getting close to that, there's also always Shifu level. But
we'll aspire to that.
But no, it's great to be here, and I love this concept of a love letter. But yeah, and you did something else which I really appreciated. You talked about the team, and I have to admit, Donna Lee, my co-founder, are really only able to do this because we don't stand on shoulders, but we work amidst a team of giants. Yeah, we've really we're so lucky to be putting together a team of people that are practitioners of carbon markets, that are people that are totally dedicated to this topic of quality.
But they're attracted by the leaders because you guys had the vision. You and Donna set that North Star and they all followed. That's leadership, whether you're a reluctant leader or not.
Well, I think obviously everybody has a part to play. But I think what unites us more than the leaders is what we want to achieve. And it's actually a great way to talk about Caylx at the beginning. We set up Caylx at the beginning of 2021 with a very simple mission. We wanted to strengthen the impact of carbon markets for the benefit of the planet and people.
Oh,
we
I
can unpack
love
that a
that
little
mission.
bit, but
That's awesome.
that's why we did it, and that is honestly why the team's joining us. We're
Believing in the
just
mission, they're aligned.
we're just trying to help make that happen. But that is
Sure.
seriously why a lot of the people are joining us. Why I've been able to attract people like our chief scientist, Deborah, who's a former professor at the University of Virginia.
Mhm.
There's so many amazing people in that team. We set up the company to try and push the market in the direction of more impact, because Donna and I, each with our own background, we're seeing this growing interest in carbon markets.
Mhm.
We're aware, again, by our own backgrounds, of the variability of quality. And we're saying, look, if this growing interest translates into a growing amount of money and it's just going to wash across the market indiscriminately, there's going to be a waste. There's
Yep.
going to be expectations that aren't going to be met. There are
Mhm.
going to be people who are going to be attacked on their reputations of, why did you buy this credit? It doesn't stand for anything. And we thought, hey, there's an opportunity here. If we can just be a guide, if we can be, sometimes we talk internally about Sacagawea,
Mhm.
the person who helped the pioneers find their way across North America. If we can be a guide and point people to where to not to go and where to
Where
go,
to go? Yeah, you can play an
then we
active
can
role and help to
actually
shape the
then we can
market.
actually have an impact.
That's amazing.
And so that's how we set it up. My background is in carbon project development and also in thinking about how you market carbon credits. Donna's background is more with a government and civil society
Mhm.
background, and having worked with a lot of the parties that are key stakeholders in the market. But that's what united us. We need to make it easier for businesses that use carbon credits to find their way to quality,
Mhm.
so that they achieve more impact, and also so that they can avoid the risk that comes with buying credits that end up being junk.
Sure.
So let's face it, the market has the whole gamut. It
Yeah,
has
it's a spectrum.
projects that do really well,
Mhm.
that actually do what they say and claim, which is to represent 1 ton of CO2 removal or reduction. Just like you have credits that unfortunately don't do that.
Mhm.
And so what we want to do is to change the narrative a bit from one of, oh, this is murky, I don't know what to do, I might as well stay on the sideline.
The perverse outcome of inaction.
Exactly. And that might lead to taking a action lever off the board. Yeah, and obviously nobody thinks that carbon crediting is the solution, right?
No,
That's
even the market practitioners
yeah,
like myself definitely don't. It is a solution,
yeah,
one of many that can all be congruent and
yeah.
all happening at the same time.
And we all know if we're going to get there being solving this climate crisis, we're going to need all the pieces on the board.
Mhm.
So you don't want one piece being taken off the board because people say, it's too difficult, it's too risky, it's too this, it's too that. We want to move from that to a place where we all say, yeah, it's a market where there's risk and there are tools and there's data to manage that risk. Just like there are tools and data in most markets around historically and around the world,
Mhm.
to say, okay, I have the data. I don't buy this, but I buy that. My stakeholders want this, so therefore I'm more interested in Africa, or I'm more interested in technology solutions, or I'm interested in nature. Well, within that, what should I be looking at? What should I be watching out for? So it's a much more mature world, which is something I hope the ecosystem will start acknowledging. It's a
Mhm.
more mature ecosystem. Anyway, that's why we
That's
exist.
the genesis.
Yeah.
And again, that's fantastic because you're essentially helping to navigate the market where it needs to go and navigating that chasm in terms of that inaction, which is the default position. And quite frankly, a lot of folks on the market side are bemoaning that inaction right now.
Mm-hmm.
And some fail to acknowledge that this quality discussion, this integrity discussion needs to happen. And there's conversely, like you said again now, spectrum, folks like myself and so many other really, really, really smart people that are working on the integrity question. Ultimately, it's a trust issue. And as you said, it's not binary effectively. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just want to get your opinion on this. But essentially, it's a spectrum. There's quality. Decisions need to be data driven to derive those insights. And ultimately, it's about risk and navigating that risk. Is that, do you think, a fair assessment?
That's a very good way of putting it. It is not binary at all, and it is now manageable.
Now manageable. Great.
Yeah, because maybe 5 years plus ago, you could say, hey, look, you didn't have many options, right? You'd say, okay, well, it's a verified credit. I'm just going to go for it.
Yeah, that was binary. It was either in or it was out.
And then you could put up your hands and say, hey, that's what I did. And still you could be exposed to this risk. I think with the advent of a lot of innovation in the ecosystem, there's been fantastic progress in terms of the availability of geospatial data. There's been other types of data, and ratings are now available, and that's where we play with Caylx Global. Now you can all of a sudden say, hey, I can quantify this. I can say, what's an A plus? What's a B plus? What do I want to use the credit for? You can equally start saying that around other types of impact, sustainable development impact, and saying, hey, what do I care about? What do I want to use the credit for? Is it for offsetting purposes? In which case you would probably want to say, well, therefore the credit really ought to have a very high likelihood of standing for a ton. Or is it more to make a contribution, to show a contribution? And you say, hey, I care a lot about biodiversity or about communities in the area where I, as a business, am active. So you can now start being much more selective, knowing that if you make a claim, that claim is supported by the data, the evidence, the analysis.
And can be substantiated.
Exactly.
Fantastic. That is such a, excuse the pun here, a sober observation.
But we'll keep it sober as long as we can.
Cheers, mate. So Duncan, thanks for that really insightful assessment and, again, sobering, excuse the pun, view of the market. So now let's talk about that duality. There's a carbon component around quantifying and substantiating those claims. So let's touch on that one, and then I want to come back to the sustainable development impacts piece. So on the carbon piece, and it may be counterintuitive to some folks, but I think you guys came out with a really interesting, I think it was commentary or it was a commentary or a piece very recently, where essentially, and I'm again, I don't want to put words in your mouth here, but you, because of a data-driven approach, highlighted that some of the projects that maybe lack charisma, let's call them the ugly ducklings, happen to have a lot of super high integrity with regards to substantiating these claims. Can you unpack that for me? What are the types of methodology and project types that maybe aren't so charismatic and talked about, but have significant impact from a climate perspective?
Yeah, no, it's a great topic, and this concept of, hey, we need to look at those less charismatic projects came up as we started racking up the numbers. So we launched our platform with 50 projects rated on there, and we're today somewhere between 450 and 500. So
wow, that is a very rapid rise.
And as the numbers started rising, we're like, hey, there's and remember, we exist to try and push the market in the direction of higher quality, more impact. And we started saying, hey, in these higher ratings, which in our system is like an A plus and an A, and a little bit below that, we started seeing projects that aren't the typical ones that everybody is aware of, like some of the red projects or some of the renewable energy projects that have a lot of tons out there.
And have dominated the supply quotient, absolutely.
Exactly. For a while, that was more than 2/3 of what was being traded. But we started seeing landfill gas capture, ozone depleting substances, biogas, biodigesters, that type of stuff.
They're not that sexy, but they have impact.
They're a little bit more challenging to put in your sustainable development report.
I had this exact same conversation with an enterprise client recently.
But in terms of what they do of actually standing for a claim of 1 ton of reduced or removed carbon emissions, or its equivalent, they actually do really well.
Yeah. So the carbon score and this is unimpeachable.
Exactly. So in our system, so we rate credits on a scale of A plus to E. We assess them along the dimensions that you would expect. So additionality, and then a couple of over-crediting related dimensions, which is to do with the baseline, the risk of leakage, the risk of emissions of the project itself, and permanence, and the risk of overlapping claims.
Yeah.
But on that, they were doing really well. And so we felt it was necessary to say, hey, people, the market is more than those couple of project types that everybody trades in. There are some unpolished gems here to be found. And anecdotally, I'm hearing that some of those projects are getting a lot more interest than they used to.
They are.
Um, and so I think that's a good thing.
I think it's a great thing. Yeah.
So those are
Diamonds in the rough. The ugly ducklings,
ugly
let's call them.
ducklings. Yeah,
Mixed metaphors. But
yeah.
I like that. That's good because essentially, and many of those methodologies, like you said, are so robust in terms of the design. They're essentially unimpeachable, right? So you mentioned landfill gas, biogas digesters, etc. They're effectively displacing what would otherwise happen with waste products in the field, whatever it might be, through anaerobic digestion and putting up methane,
That's right.
but ultimately capturing that methane and ultimately using that for energy and essentially mitigating the climate impact. There's a multiplier effect of methane versus CO2. And we talk about CO2 equivalency. A lot of people talk about carbon, but it's CO2 equivalency. So that's the genesis there, and that's great for folks that understand it. It makes sense. It's good that you've put that spotlight on that segment of the market because it's a positive story, as opposed to the
That's right.
other kind of vitriol that keeps harping on in this marketplace around looking at it as an imperfect solution, and then therefore, like you said earlier, simulating or resulting with a perverse outcome of
Yeah.
inaction.
And if I might add one thing, right?
Please.
Because I think you put your finger on something quite important here, which is there are really good stories there. Yeah. What we see though is that you can't say this type of project is all good and that's all bad.
Great.
There is no
Nuance.
such thing as a type or a country or a standard
Mhm.
where you can say, well, there you can do everything blindly.
Great.
We've cut through our data because now with more than 450 projects in the data set, we start doing some interesting statistical analysis. We've cut through the data any which way. So we've looked at it obviously by project type,
Yep.
by country, by standard, whether it's CORSIA eligible or not. You name it, we've sliced it.
Yep.
But
so it's no longer an art, now it's a science.
Yeah, and there is never a type where everything's good or everything's bad. There's always a distribution.
Statistic deviation.
Yeah.
It's the same as when you're a kid at school. There's a bell-shaped distribution, right?
There's a curve. And so what that tells you is it's important that the market has what is now available, which is project level assessment of risk that these credits don't represent, or if you want to flip it around, confidence that these projects represent that 1 ton claim.
Great. So many questions. So, okay, let's park that one for a second because you intimated this around baselines, over-crediting, etc. And then in that distribution, essentially worries around that over-crediting and that ton that's being sold not representing the 1 ton.
That's right.
You get that, and I don't think you'll see any pushback, certainly from me and other market practitioners on this. But there is an important topic that you touched on earlier around the sustainable development goals and the impacts associated with many of the projects. From a marketing piece, that feels good, right? It's a great story. But when you actually visit the projects on the ground, I've had the fortune to visit many of those projects on the ground in both Kenya and in Guatemala, and I've been to a number of other projects, and seeing the impacts that it has on indigenous communities, on local communities, on biodiversity. There's a lot, right? Let's talk about that component because you've also sliced and diced the data.
Yep.
What insights can you provide me on the SDG impacts of many of the projects that are essentially dual? They're carbon offset projects, but essentially they're masking as sustainable development goal impact projects, and they're looking for a currency, and carbon happens to be it.
I'm so delighted that you bring this up because I too have had a privilege of visiting some of these projects and being on a boat in the middle of a swamp forest and seeing the benefit brought to communities of a market-based system where people could actually productively work on something that is compatible with long-term forest health, those type of things. So that is super inspiring. We believe at Caylx, remember a little bit earlier I said we believe our mission is to increase the impact of carbon markets for the benefit of the planet and people. So we're really looking with as much attention and as much rigor at projects that make claims around, hey, we also do this for the community or that for biodiversity. And if you wish, the last or the blueprint along which it's easiest to evaluate that is to look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
Yeah, great. It's a great lens.
Those 17 goals. And what we basically do is we have a separate rating. So on the one hand, we have our greenhouse gas rating, And then we have an SDG rating, Sustainable Development Goal rating. And that one looks at the claims made by a project around specific the claims made. Hey, I'm doing something for SDG 4, quality education, or SDG 1, no, zero hunger, or no poverty, or and so on and so on. And we look at the evidence brought forward. So we when we rate those projects, we only do it when they have a certification for it. So you will have heard of
SC Vista,
TCB or SD
VCB.
Vista or Gold Standard for the Global
Of course.
Goals. And we look at, hey, they made a claim on SDG 2. What evidence are they bringing? And then we assess that claim around how much evidence of change is there? Is there just a story of, hey, we did some activity, like we planted fruit trees in the community, or actually do you see a story of real outcomes and impact in terms of that has led to the increased calorific value of the food in the community by X and a reduction of malnutrition by Y? And then we look at the quality of that evidence. Is it a story or is it time series of data? And based on those two dimensions, we can then start forming an opinion on and an assessment of, hey, the claim against that SDG, how strong is it?
How strong is that? Okay.
And then all those claims get added together in one SDG score for the project. And so we believe that those claims, that the impact that some of these projects have, deserve to be assessed with the same analytical and data-based rigor, so that indeed those projects that do the most get fully rewarded for it, because it costs the project extra money to do this.
Great. I'm so glad you said that.
And if you're not going to be recognized for it, why would you go the extra mile? So what we want to make sure is those people who do go the extra mile, those projects that do go the extra mile and really do something together with the community that has long-term impact, that can last.
Have a basis spread to the upside from the benchmarks.
Exactly.
Great.
You got it.
I love that. That is so empowering, and recognizing the important work that a lot of people on the ground have and do. And so I think that's ultimately transformative. I've got a lot of questions about the specific rigor around how that's quantified. It leads into questions around the monitoring, reporting, verification, the MRV piece.
Sure.
So you mentioned there's this paradigm shift with regards to that data on geospatial data and a bunch of other metrics.
Yep.
But I'm curious as to how that's done on the STG side. A lot of that would be very, very difficult to quantify, no?
It took us the effort of developing a ratings framework for this. We obviously rely on the ecosystem itself. When you apply for a certification under SD Vista or CCB or with Gold Standard, you're required to submit monitoring reports. You're required to do the homework. Now, what we look at is, in that homework, how solid is the data? How solid is the evidence? That's what we based our assessments on.
Okay.
So that's how it becomes a very mutually reinforcing ecosystem, where we use that data to then start drawing conclusions from it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. That's really fascinating. So my brain is spinning here, and I want to ask a lot of questions. Carbon score, SDG impact scores. How can we move forward in a positive and constructive manner? I think you mentioned off camera earlier about an event that Caylx just hosted in New York during New York Climate Week with
That's right.
OneShot.Earth.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about that for me? I read it online, and I really want to unpack that with you.
Great. Look, yeah, we did something together with OneShot, Caylx Global and OneShot together during Climate Week, where we hosted closed door an event around looking at what can be done on those credits that do well, except on the dimension of over-crediting. Yeah, it's a bit of saying, hey, we have all these credits out there, can something be done? And I have to emphasize, it's something we're exploring, we're experimenting with.
But you're in the lab trying to find solutions.
Exactly. And so what we did together with OneShot is say, let's break this one open. And this, in this case, was I think it was a landfill gas project that did well on all the dimensions of our greenhouse gas rating, except on overcrediting. Yeah, we looked at, okay, well, what's in the overcrediting, and within overcrediting, we look at baselines, we look at leakage risk, we look at project emissions. We came to the conclusion that, hey, if if that project hadn't claimed 1 ton, if it had claimed for less, it would have been okay. So turn that equation on its head and say, well, do you need to retire more than one credit to be able to use it to offset 1 ton? And the answer is yes. And so we did the math with the data that now exists, and one shot launched a adjusted portfolio. In other words, a bundle or a portfolio that compensates for that overcrediting problem. And then we put a rating on that of A plus, saying, well, as a bundle, this represents an A plus. Now, obviously, it requires transparency because trust is
critical.
Essential, right? People don't want, oh, what kind of hocus pocus did you do? But as long as it's transparent, it's well measured, and it's communicated clearly, then I think that's one area how you can start fixing the market. Now, it's obviously not the only avenue, but I think this is an encouraging one.
I think it's really encouraging, and I think it deserves recognition for a number of reasons. Essentially, there's an acknowledgement that the carbon market is not perfect. I don't think anyone in this space really ever claimed for it to be perfect. I think we've been fairly open to the criticism and acknowledge that trust is essential. Trust has been eroded, and we want to regain that. These types of initiatives do that, I believe. And essentially, it's applying a fairly pragmatic approach of risk-adjusted returns effectively from portfolio management, essentially, right? And so in this case, you're applying it to existing projects. But can I just extend that to maybe what's the potential that in the project design, maybe for the next issuance, that the project like developers, the proponents, essentially embrace this as a way to maximize the outcome, the rating, and if there's a correlation with the price to the rating, which I believe that there is, and we can go into that, how do we incentivize them to do that?
I want to first acknowledge you for putting a very important point in there in your question, Renee, which is trust and credibility are essential if we want this market to grow to its full potential.
Oh yeah, people talk about scale all the time, and it's not possible without trust. It's the core ingredient.
I'm glad you're using this platform to make that point. But back to the question here about how can we help the development of new projects towards that higher level of quality and integrity. I think there's a couple of mechanisms. The one that I'm hoping will start filtering through, and I'd love to hear what you think about how much of that is already there, is basically to see quality as part of price discovery.
Oh, absolutely.
To see that happen.
That was my dream on the exchange side.
Exactly.
To usher it in. Effectively, when you came to me, when other folks from other rating agencies that are innovating in and around the space, that was a light bulb moment. I said, oh my goodness, I can just see a future where there is a differentiation. So basis spreads. If you have a mean, everything adjusts in terms of that spectrum, and the price is relative. And if it's really, really, really hard to get that A plus, well, guess what? There's a big spread with regards to the pricing. If it conversely on the SDG side, the Viridios folks doing a really great job around that with an AI model, and their thesis was very simple. I thought it was ahead of their time. It was really audacious, but that projects that differentiate themselves on SDGs that are really, really, really hard to demonstrate extract a significant premium in the marketplace. And I thought that's fabulous.
And imagine if we now can back that up with, hey, how strong is the evidence behind that particular claim? That ought to make that even stronger, that feedback loop.
Yeah, and then that noise also goes away, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's objectivity, it's like data, it's like look at the science.
Yeah. And so we are very hopeful that we're going to see more and more of that feedback loop of connecting quality to price happen in reality. I think it's mostly anecdotal at this point, but I'd love to hear if you have more data on it. But we're hearing anecdotal evidence of projects that are doing well on their ratings on both the carbon side as well as on the SDG side, fetching higher prices.
I can reinforce that, but I can only do so anecdotally in this forum. But I think we've had it off camera previously, and then ultimately what it is it's an ecosystem, it's a network, and you need to have, from the ecosystem analogy, cross-pollination. From a network, data sharing, right? And so rating agencies need to work with exchanges that have this price signal and data and distribute that around, hey, what is the correlation here with regards to a high rating? Does it fetch a premium, or conversely, a project with a low rating, is it trading at a discount?
Right.
And if that thesis is correct, test it with the data. Great. That's a reinforcing feedback loop over time. And as we start to distribute it, it's no different to other asset classes. Let's look at bonds, right? In the debt markets, you have ratings and they play a significant role in terms of how these instruments are priced.
Right.
Why ought carbon, an emerging asset class of the future, be any different?
And the anecdotes we're hearing is a broker here who says, hey, these landfill gas projects, there used to be a lot of this particular credit, it's got a high rating. These guys are totally sold out now. Trying to figure out how they can do the next project because they're loving it. Just recently, I was talking with a trader who was starting to tell me about the price sensitivity of the ratings data, which is a new thing for all the ratings agency that forces us to act with supreme integrity to make sure, hey, it's starting to become price sensitive data. We need to be careful about that. So that's important for all of us. So that's one feedback loop. Higher prices, therefore, what do I do as developer to get my project there?
Again, your North Star, you're helping to shape the market towards that outcome.
But I think we also have an obligation to come out with material and insights and transparency about how we do our work that allows developers to look at it, to understand it, to digest it, and to include that in their thinking about how to develop projects. For example, around RED, a much discussed project type.
Sure.
We published a report a few months ago calling How to Turn Red Green.
I like that analogy.
Where we had 6 pieces of advice for project developers, ranging from the baseline. You need to choose an appropriately realistic, between brackets, conservative baseline. More attention to the permanence of the project, longer project timelines, longer commitments to do monitoring. And
that'll also beget greater and longer tenors on the offtake side.
Exactly.
Because if clients have that confidence in the longevity and quote unquote permanence of that project, then they're essentially more willing to do that longer term offtake. One, very selfishly, they want to hedge that price risk. But if they know that project is of unimpeachable quality, then it's a no-brainer for them.
And we made 4 other recommendations, one around additionality, making sure that there is clear evidence of prior consideration. In other words, that carbon was clearly considered before the start of the project, as well as an analysis of the financial impact of carbon, as well as on leakage, to really conduct a proper estimation and include that estimation in the calculation of the VERs. And so on. So we made those recommendations, and we want to do that across more project types so that we give more guidance to the development world. And what's really encouraging then is to hear from a developer actually here in the region. I'm sure you know them as well as I do. Told us after we published that paper of How to Turn Red Green, saying, Duncan, we convened our development team. We looked at our entire portfolio of projects, and we screened them for those 6 recommendations that Caylx Global made. And we're taking action where we think we still have some improvement to do.
That's great.
But that's the kind of impact we're looking for.
And so now dialogue,
that engagement,
it's a positive feedback loop here.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And so that's true stakeholder engagement, everybody working collaboratively, as opposed to this tribalism and almost destructive kind of vitriol that happens in and around markets, which is fine, again, but it's actually constructive and it helps to move the agenda forward. So I think that's fantastic. So cheers to that. I think congratulations on making those 6 recommendations. Okay, so now I want to land the plane, right? You've taken me to high altitude here and we're having a great old time. I want to bring it back down to earth. So now we've talked about the carbon score, we talked about SDG impacts, talked about the broader integrity piece, we talked about the integration of data and transparency.
Yeah.
All of this is constructive and it's essentially building a very solid foundation to reestablish trust. So kudos to you and your team again, and to folks in this ecosystem that are working hard to do this. But now let's get traction. Now I'm a corporate.
Okay.
And I'm doing essentially the right thing on a voluntary basis to purchase high quality credits. I have a net zero commitment. I'm actively engaging in reducing my emissions internally, scope 1, purchasing renewables, scope 2, looking at my scope 3 emissions in my value chain, and I'm going beyond value chain now in terms of emissions. I'm doing it all great.
Right.
How do I make the right decisions about choosing the right projects to be part of my portfolio?
Mm-mm.
It seems like an obvious question to folks who are operating a ratings agency, but you have the tools.
I think we do. But first, again, I want to compliment you on the context setting because it matters a lot what you said in terms of saying, hey, I'm doing the whole lot. I actually have a climate strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I am working on my own emissions. I am looking at my supply chain. I
Yeah.
am looking at the full scope 3 about the life cycle usage of my product.
That's important because of the distinction. Like people think that market practitioners are essentially Luddites, and all we care about is just the sale of the credit. Fine, that's the outcome. That's how we measure success. But it's a part of an ecosystem. It's part of a system, and
Yeah.
without the internal abatements, then it's just window dressing. And no one I think that's really serious about carbon markets is ever advocating that. It's part of a broader decarbonization strategy. So that's just
I love that
this
context.
disclaimer.
So,
but
good.
yeah.
And then there's this question, okay, well, I want to do more or I want to do faster. And I think carbon markets and carbon credits may be a vehicle for achieving that. Then I'd say there is no reason to sit on the sideline when it comes to carbon. Yeah.
Oh,
Let's just
amen
put
to
that
that.
out there.
Put
There
that
is no reason to sit on the sideline. Because it isn't one where you go like, oh, it's all untrustworthy. I can't take a decision because now the data, the evidence is there.
There are some loud voices that do say that, but I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's not an objective viewpoint.
The only thing that I would say is don't think that you can just put on a blindfold and say, well, if it's a carbon credit, I can buy it and it'll be okay. That doesn't work.
No, that doesn't. But I think that's a misnomer as well. I had a really great chat with Alvin Lee from Pure Earth, and he called because I asked him, hey, how do you see this whole thing emerging? He said essentially we need carbon services, a service industry around carbon. I think that's already underway. We see so many really brilliant people and companies that are delivering these solutions, and there's no one that comes to mind that is just saying, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, picking it. There's a very deliberate strategy in terms of how you build a portfolio. I'm not saying that that's 100% again, spectrum. There'll be some buyers that just purchase the lowest possible cost, but that doesn't prove to be a very sustainable strategy long term. Everybody seems to be shifting to the right-hand side of that graph and effectively looking to go up in terms of quality whilst balancing price. And so there's a balancing act to be had. I think ratings provide a solution in order to achieve that outcome.
So let's land this plane.
Let's land the plane.
And put it very succinctly. The data is there. Ratings agency provided. Obviously, we think you should use Caylx Global, but we'll leave that aside. Use the data, make conscious choices. If it's too good to be true, it probably ain't. If it's available for $50 a ton, yeah, maybe that means something.
Sometimes also being objective, like
maybe there's
as
an
a
ugly
market
duckling
practitioner,
out there.
there is an ugly duckling, and sometimes we've seen it all throughout the history of the market. You mentioned it. Sometimes it's really expensive to operate these projects, and sometimes there's distressed asset sale. Nick DeLeva, my business partner, and myself have received many a call saying, "Hey guys, we just need a liquidity event because we have to pay these dues this week." And then oftentimes there's someone on the buy side who says, "Yeah, I'll lift that at that price." That's a steal. And so that's a value-driven thing.
I hear you.
As more and more liquidity builds, that gap tends to narrow. But hey, that's okay. That's a functioning market.
I think it's actually it opens up another important point. Is it's also not necessarily to only buy DAC at $600 a ton. Now DAC's great. It's an industry that's going to develop further, but
it's right at the vanguard of the new technology paradigm.
Exactly.
And we saw that with photovoltaics on the solar side. I remember when it was $800 a megawatt hour, and now it's the cheapest form of electricity at less than $2 a megawatt hour. And so technologies go in cycles, and they tend to compress over time as they build scale. True. I think DAC, I think other CDR technologies will achieve that similar sort of inflection point or deflection point, whichever perspective you want to look at it. But you're right. I don't think, certainly clients that I've worked with that are either large industrials or large airlines with fairly weak balance sheets compared to emissions have a very different paradigm to the inverse, technology companies that have huge balance sheets relative to their emissions profile. So certain folks are the haves, the have-nots, and that you have to, as a market, find solutions for everybody.
And so the answer is actively manage this quality dimension of your carbon credit purchases, either directly or with a marketplace or an intermediary that
Mhm.
that also has the data and actually shows the evidence that yes, we manage according to this data.
Yeah.
That's the
Make
evidence.
educated decisions based on data-driven insights.
But don't stand on the sidelines.
Don't stand on the sidelines.
Doesn't help.
Yeah. Awesome. What an excellent point to make. So thank you for that. It's been a pleasure to speak with you. I'm going to pause on that point and cheers to that, to that sentiment. Don't stand on the sidelines. Thank you.